bad diagnosis. They had diagnosed me with congestive heart failure. They've taken that away. I don't even know what I don't have now. But after that diagnosis, when I finished that half marathon after that one, that was another very emotional finish line, right? And so there's when I finished the only full marathon I did, that was as I dragged myself across the finish line, that was a remarkable finish just because I did finish and I didn't die, right? And so, but the finish line, all of a sudden, I began to realize that it wasn't the finish line that I talked about when we were talking. Oh yeah, this kind of. Oh, I did a 10K. I did the trail race. Here's this. Here's that. It was all the in betweens. I didn't talk about the start. Maybe it was late. Maybe it was cold. Maybe it was raining. Maybe it was whatever. I didn't talk about the start. And I didn't talk that much about the finish, except that just the acknowledgement that yeah, we finished it, but it was the in between that made the race so interesting, right? It's like, oh, I remember that race. Oh, about mile 10, this happened, or at mile 3, I thought this. At mile 4, or mile 11, I got to 12, and it was all the in betweens that made it the race. It made each race interesting. It made each race fun. It made it exciting. And I thought, that's what it is in life. We have a lot of finish lines, right? And the ultimate one is that we're going to finish life itself and be with Christ, and that's going to be a great finish line, right? But it's all these little finish lines of life that give us this sense that we do have victory, that we can win, that we can trust him. Think about the pandemic. We've crossed that finish line now, pretty much. We still got some little residual stuff, but we've crossed it. And what did we find? We found out his grace was enough. That was part of the journey, the in-between part that became the focus, that became the best part, right? We found out that he could carry us when we needed it and push us if we need it, or pull us if we need, or he can get us to moving where he needs us to go, and even in the middle of very difficult circumstances and situations. We found out that we held more to his mercy and his grace and his peace. We sought out his peace. It was that part of the journey that was more important than the finish line. And as I look back over my life, I've had lots of finish lines, right? Lots of things I've come through. Sicknesses, you have too. Been thrown out of 2 vehicles, 2 different wrecks. There's all kinds of things. You've got a list of things that God has brought you through. And I've got a list of things that I know God has brought me through also. And so we can look back at those, but it's not the getting through part. It's what we went through to get through that we start going, oh, wow, God, during this trial, God taught me this. But during this trial, I learned that I learned the power of memorizing the word and just meditating on it over and over. When I was ill, that's what I learned. I learned the power of how you can hold on to one verse and it can be that lifeline to God in the midst of a really dark, hard time, right? So I started thinking about that. So I looked up the 2 different scriptures on race. One says, do you know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives a prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain the prize. Everyone who competes for the prize is temperate, and they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we run for an imperishable crown. So the things that we learn on the in-betweens are forever. His grace is forever. His mercy is forever. His peace is forever. His love is forever. And we overcome these obstacles. We run these mini races in the middle of the big race to get to him. And in the middle, we discover him. And isn't that what it's about, is discovering him in the middle of our messes, discovering him in the middle of our trials, discovering him and his mercy and his grace and his peace and his love in the middle of the race. The race is not always easy. If you run a race too easy, you miss the whole thing because you're just done. And it's not any fun at all. Maybe you stumble. I've had a couple of races that one race I guess I fell in. I've had races that I thought I wasn't going to make it, but I did. And it was the in-between that taught me I could do it, right? And as a matter of fact, the more races you do, the more you understand how likely it is you're going to finish. After I did several half marathons, I was like, okay, once I get to mile 4, I'm in single digits. I only have 9 miles to go, right? Once I get to mile six, the 10K mark, I'm right at not quite halfway done. I've got, and then I get to the 10 mile mark. I only have a 5K left. And as we work through situations in our lives, we find ways to encourage ourselves. We find ways to encourage one another. But it's the in-betweens that shapes the race, not the finish line. The finish line was done. You get that medal, that's what you ran for. Whew, yeah, then you got to recover, right? And so the other scripture on races is here in Hebrews 12. This is a familiar one. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And here's the key: looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of the start line and the finish line of our faith, who for the joy who was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. We focus, and we should, on the death of Christ. And right now, the Christmas time, we're focusing on the birth of Christ, and that's okay. But there's only a chapter or so, maybe two, on the birth of Christ, and there's only a chapter or two on the death of Christ. And yet those were powerful times in his life, and very important to the journey. But we got the chapters in between that tell us all the stuff that happened in between his start when he was born and his finish when he died, resurrected, right? And then there's even more chapters past that finish line, right, to get us through our finish lines in life. And so it's about the journey in between. That's the part we read. We don't even read the birth except in December, right? That's the only time of year we read about his birth, right? Most of the time we don't even read, and we don't read about his resurrection unless it's Easter. That's when we read about the resurrection. Most of the time it's just Easter. We only read those times maybe twice a year. We read all the other stuff in between, right? Because that's the bulk of his journey to that finish line. And that finish line was so important to eternity because it's what set everything right that was broken in the garden, right? And I've said it before, but God planned it before he said, let there be light, because he knew that Adam and Eve were going to mess up. He knew we needed a way to get back to him, and he wanted to make sure that we could get back to him. And it's the in-betweens that shaped the journey. It's not every finish line is different in a race. Each race is different, and the race itself is different. But when you start telling the stories about a race or a hike, it's all the in-between stuff that made it up. Well, God's got all the in-between stuff right here. And we can talk about the times we trusted him and we got through, or the times we failed to trust him, but we figured it out, and so we could trust him next time we face something, right? Or the times that he carried us when we knew we couldn't go one more step. We can talk about the times he gave us strength because we waited on him. And it's all those in-betweens that makes the race interesting. So don't despise the bad things in your life, because that's what's going to get you to the finish line. So the finish line is sweeter when you've overcome obstacles. You don't read stories about, oh yeah, they're really fast, they're really good, they don't even have to work, they just go run 100 miles and it's just no big deal. Nobody cares about that person. They're great. They get the medals. They get the money, right? But we thrive on those stories of those who had to overcome extreme circumstances. That somebody runs with a prosthetic leg. Now that's a story. That's a sheer determination, and that's where we gain strength. We aren't that encouraged by those who do it naturally and just there was no obstacles, right? Nobody really has no obstacles, but you know what I mean. But it's those stories of people who faced hard circumstances, their lions' dens, their dark prison cells. I just read a story. It's been come across Facebook a couple of times, and a guy that was homeless. He'd actually been in prison, then he was homeless. He'd been on drugs and all of that, and he got saved, and he came in. Actually, I've seen two stories this week, and the guy got saved, and actually now he's a pastor at a church, and has done a turnaround, and that's amazing. But it's the backstory that makes you go, wow, no big deal. Somebody becomes a pastor. Ooh, that's good. I'm glad you're a pastor. But when you hear that backstory, you go, man, he overcame